Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, articles, research, you name it, plus our own notes, and really distill it down, pull out the key insights, the facts that matter, all shapes for you, our listener.
And today we're tackling one of Hollywood's most persistent shadows. A really chilling, enduring mystery that's gripped Los Angeles for, over 75 years now. It just refuses to fade.
It really does. Okay, let's set the scene. It's a cold morning, January 1947, Los Angeles. A woman, Betty Berzinger, she's walking with her little daughter in Leimert Park, a vacant lot.
Right. Pretty ordinary start to the day.
Until it wasn't. She sees something pale in the grass. First thought, a mannequin. Just discarded junk.
Understandable, I suppose, from a distance.
But as she gets closer, the horror sets in. It's not plastic, it's a body. A young woman, naked, cut in half at the waist.
And meticulously arranged.
Almost.
Posed. Which is deeply unsettling in itself.
Utterly. Later identified as Elizabeth Short.
Yeah.
And the details, they're just brutal. Drained of blood, washed clean, mutilated in ways that, they didn't just shock people, they left a scar.
We're talking about those infamous cuts on her face, right? The ones extending her mouth, almost ear to ear, like a permanent, grotesque smile.
The Glasgow smile, yeah.
Yeah.
And the bisection itself, surgically precise, apparently. A clean cut. Plus, and this is critical, no blood at the scene. None.
Which immediately signals to investigators, this isn't where it happened. The murder site is somewhere else entirely.
Exactly. The public reaction was instantaneous, profound shock. Nationwide fascination, almost immediately.
And what's really fascinating in a grim way is how quickly that horror was almost packaged, branded even.
Yeah, tell us about that.
The sheer brutality just catapulted the case into the public imagination. I mean, it sparked endless speculation, countless suspects over the years, dozens and dozens of books. It became this dark, constant hum beneath the Hollywood soundtrack.
And then came the name.
Right. The press, always looking for that catchy angle, they coined a name that would define her forever. Turned Elizabeth Short, the person, into the Black Dahlia.
And that transformation is it's so key to understanding why this case still resonates, isn't it? That name wasn't organic, it was a media creation.
Absolutely. A press invention. Probably, as you hinted, riffing off that popular noir film from '46, The Blue Dahlia.
And maybe her dark clothes. Or the story about wearing a flower in her hair.
Yeah, those details were floating around. It shows just how fast the media machine could take a real victim, a human being, and turn her into, a myth, an icon.
It blurred the lines immediately. Elizabeth Short, the woman who lived and breathed, versus the Black Dahlia, the symbol, the legend. And that shaped everything.
It really did. It shifted the narrative almost instantly from just a police investigation, which it was, obviously, into this sprawling cultural phenomenon.
So this deep dive today, it's not just about recounting the horrific facts, although we have to touch on them.
No, exactly. It's about unpacking why this mystery endures. We need to look at it through all these different lenses: historical, psychological, sociological, cultural, even forensic. What happened, yes, but why does it still haunt us? And how has it shaped so much more than just an old police file?
That's precisely the mission. We want to give you, our listener, a really solid research-based overview, offer some insights, maybe a fresh angle on a story you think you know inside out. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we start digging?
I think we have to start with her, with Elizabeth Short herself, ground ourselves in the history, her brief life, and how she ended up in that horrifying spotlight.
Okay, so Elizabeth Short, born in Boston, 1924, came from a family of 5 daughters, some family turmoil there too, right? Her father disappeared for a while.
Yeah, vanished, presumed dead, then reappeared years later. Adds another layer of complexity to her background. But like you said, she was one of many young women in that post-WWII era, sort of drifting.
Moving around the U.S., working on jobs, looking for something more.
Exactly. Seeking excitement, maybe a better life. And eventually, like so many others, she lands in Los Angeles. Mid-1940s, drawn by that Hollywood allure, the dream.
That small screen dream narrative, it pulled so many people west.
It really paints a picture of that post-war moment, doesn't it? Huge societal shifts, people moving everywhere, seeking opportunity. LA was booming, this beacon of possibility.
But also perhaps a place where you could get lost.
Tragically, yes. For every success story, there were those who found, something much darker, as Elizabeth Short's story shows so brutally.
And tragedy is what she found. January 15, 1947. Her body discovered in that vacant lot. We've mentioned the condition, but let's reiterate the key points for the investigators.
Okay, naked, bisected cleanly at the waist.
Those horrific facial cuts mound at ears.
The removal of her uterus, which points towards something very specific, perhaps ritualistic, or maybe just deeply personal and enraged.
And critically again, no blood.
At all.
On the scene.
These details were, and still are, just crucial. The precision, almost surgical, of the bisection. It immediately suggested the killer wasn't just frenzied. They had control. Maybe knowledge.
Anatomical knowledge. Medical. That was the speculation.
Right. And the clean scene, no blood. It strongly reinforced that she wasn't killed there. Her body was prepared, drained, washed, maybe, then transported and deliberately placed for discovery.
A very calculated act. Not impulsive.
Seems that way, which makes it even more chilling.
And the speed of things afterwards. Remarkable for 1947 technology. Discovery, autopsy, identification, all within about 24 to 36 hours. January 15th to 16th.
They even used an early version of a fax machine, right? A photo relay system to get her picture out quickly to police and press nationwide.
Yeah, cutting edge for the time. And it worked. The story just exploded. Gruesome details, mysterious victim. It went national almost overnight.
And that's where the media frenzy really kicks into high gear. From 47 through the 50s, investigators were just swamped. Letters, tips, and crucially, dozens upon dozens of false confessions.
People wanting attention. Or genuinely disturbed.
Probably a mix of both. But the LA press, wow. The Herald Express, the Examiner, they were locked in this vicious circulation war.
And the Dahlia was front page gold.
Pure gold. They amplified every lurid detail. Sometimes, allegedly, invented things. Published info the police wanted held back. Anything to sell papers.
So the media wasn't just reporting the story. They were actively shaping it right from the get-go. Sensationalizing, maybe even misdirecting things.
Absolutely. It created this unique environment. Post-war LA was already in massive flux. Population booming, social structures shifting, celebrity culture exploding.
And the institutions, police, press, even the film industry, they were all learning how to handle and maybe even profit from these huge sensational stories.
Exactly. It was like a perfect storm for a brutal murder to become not just news, but legend.
That context is so important. It wasn't just a crime. It was a crime in that specific time and place.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the post-war anxieties were already there. Fear of crime, worries about morality changing, the anonymity of a big city.
And the Dahlia case became a lightning rod for all those fears.
Precisely. It amplified the tragedy, turned it into something larger than life, societal conditions, the media's power, basic human fascination with the macabre. It all converged.
And just to hammer home those key details, again, the body drained of blood, the clean scene, reinforces the moved body theory.
Absolutely. And the name, Black Dahlia, a quick media invention, it's striking how the police initially tried to keep her identity quiet, wasn't it?
But the Herald Express got a tip-off, ran with her name before the official release. Total media free-for-all after that.
And the adoption of that nickname, the Black Dahlia. It's kind of disturbing how effective it was. It branded her.
Turned her from a person into an icon, instantly.
Yeah. And that journalistic decision, driven by competition, it irrevocably shaped how everyone saw her. She became this tragic, maybe alluring symbol. It overshadowed her reality, maybe even skewed the investigation itself.
Okay, so that sets the historical stage. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about the impact psychologically, sociologically. Because this case became more than just a crime. It became a spectacle.
Absolutely. You have this stark contrast. For Elizabeth Short's family, her friends, this was an unimaginable personal tragedy. A devastating loss played out under this intense, often cruel, public gaze.
But for the wider public, it morphed into something different.
Yeah, it became this almost voyeuristic ritual, kind of dark entertainment. And psychologically, it triggered these patterns we still see around sensational crimes.
Like what?
Well, first, that almost obsessive fascination with the gruesome details. People wanted to know everything. Second, this deep, often romanticized sympathy for the victim, seen as this tragic figure.
Like a fallen woman, the aspiring starlet narrative.
Exactly, sometimes based on reality, sometimes purely imagined. And third, this insatiable public appetite for the whodunit aspect. Everyone became an armchair detective, desperate for answers, for closure.
Even if that closure never really came.
Especially then, the lack of resolution just fuels the speculation further.
And this shift from private grief to public spectacle had huge ripples through society, right? And the media sensationalism wasn't just selling papers, it was stoking fears.
Big time. It fueled widespread moral anxieties, fears about city life, about anonymity. especially fears for young women moving to cities like LA seen as vulnerable.
And maybe a broader sense of moral decay, post-war anxieties about society changing too fast.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The Dahlia case became this potent symbol for all those underlying worries. It was like society projected its deepest fears onto this one shocking event.
A tangible focus for intangible anxieties.
Well put. It acted like a mirror, reflecting back the unease of the era.
And what about the impact on the police? The LAPD. They were inundated.
Utterly swamped. Thousands of tips, false confessions, just a deluge of information, mostly useless. And the fact that such a high-profile case remained unsolved.
That had to damage public trust.
Hugely. It contributed to long-term skepticism about police competence, transparency, especially when it looked like they were playing ball with the press, maybe leaking things, rather than just focusing on solving the crime.
The relationship between the police and the press seemed complicated, almost symbiotic in a way.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how that whole dynamic, the perceived inefficiency, the lack of breakthroughs, the media circus, it all became part of the enduring mystery itself. It raised these uncomfortable questions about police accountability, integrity, questions we still grapple with today, really.
Definitely. And we absolutely have to talk about the gendered aspect, how Elizabeth Short herself was portrayed.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Her life, her choices, her movements, her supposed sexuality, intensely scrutinized, often weaponized in the reporting.
There's that grim pattern, isn't there? Especially back then. If a woman victim didn't fit the mold of the perfect, idealized female.
She was often subtly or not so subtly blamed, or just heavily sexualized. It was a way of making sense of the violence, maybe, but it was deeply unfair and damaging.
And it set a precedent, didn't it? A kind of template for how female victims in later sensational cases were often treated by the media.
Sadly, yes. It's a stark reminder of the biases that can creep into reporting, how cultural expectations can misrepresent and dehumanize victims, shifting focus away from the perpetrator.
To really grasp this enduring impact, let's bring in some psychological concepts. You mentioned spectacle. What about collective trauma?
Yeah, the Dahlia case is almost a textbook example of private grief being transformed into public spectacle. And it serves as this early, vivid instance of what we might now call mediated secondary trauma, meaning mass audiences experience the trauma indirectly but repeatedly through the constant news cycles, the retellings, the images. Even if you weren't personally involved, the sheer exposure creates the shared indirect form of trauma. It gets woven into the cultural memory.
So it affects people generations later, even if they just know the story.
Arguably, yes. The narrative, the images, the horror, it becomes part of the collective consciousness.
And beyond that collective aspect, what about the individual pull? That fascination with the macabre? Is there a theory for that?
There is. Terror management theory offers one perspective. It suggests that confronting mortality, especially through these sensationalized, contained narratives, can actually help us manage our own deep-seated existential dread, our fear of death.
How does that work?
Well, think about the gruesome details, the Glasgow smile, the bisection. By framing the killer as maybe having special knowledge, or by creating this whole narrative with suspects and motives, society kind of contains the horror.
Makes it less random, less terrifyingly inexplicable.
Exactly. It puts it in a box, gives it a story structure. It becomes a way to process the terror of violence and death, making the incomprehensible feel a bit more manageable, paradoxically.
Which helps explain why we keep coming back to it. It serves a psychological function almost.
It seems to. What's fascinating here is how these frameworks help us understand the why behind the obsession, not just the what of the crime.
Okay, let's pivot now to why this case still feels so relevant today. Decades on, why does the Dahlia still matter? A huge part is its life in pop culture, right? What you call the narrative economy.
Oh, absolutely huge. The story gets retold constantly. Novels, James Ellroy's The Black Dahlia being the giant, obviously, but also films, countless documentaries, podcasts, true crime blogs. It's endlessly recycled.
And each retelling kind of reinterprets it, doesn't it? Through different lenses.
Exactly. Sometimes it's pure noir, sometimes it's viewed through a feminist lens, sometimes the focus is on the forensic failures or possibilities. These retellings are vital. They don't just keep the story alive, they actively shape how new generations imagine crime, Hollywood, that whole era. They influence collective memory more than dry facts often do.
And speaking of forensics, the case is a benchmark there too, isn't it? Showing how far we've come.
A crucial reference point. You can literally trace the evolution. From those basic 1940s techniques, rudimentary photo relays, witness interviews that might seem flawed now, to today's world of DNA analysis, digital databases, geographic profiling. It's night and day. Completely.
And the Dahlia case is constantly brought up in that context. People push for retesting old evidence, hoping modern science can unlock secrets the 1940s couldn't.
So it serves as this powerful example of how new tech might solve old mysteries, offering hope for other cold cases.
Precisely. It's a symbol of that hope, even if the practical challenges of finding viable evidence from the Dahlia case itself are immense.
Which brings us to something really relevant for us doing this deep dive, and for you listening: media ethics and true crime. The Dahlia is often held up as a cautionary tale.
And rightly so. In today's world, with true crime exploding as a genre, the Dahlia reminds us of the pitfalls. Sensationalism distorting facts, armchair detectives may be overreaching.
And the potential re-traumatization of victims and families, that's huge.
Absolutely critical. How are these stories told? Who benefits? Are we being sensitive to the real human tragedy at the core? It forces us as consumers to think about how we engage with this material ethically.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, connecting this old case to today's conversations. How does the Dahlia echo in current debates about, say, violence against women or policing?
It resonates deeply. It's not just history. It mirrors ongoing struggles. The case brings up enduring issues of violence against women, how society perceives female victims, especially those seen as marginalized or non-conforming.
And policing.
Definitely. It raises timeless questions about police practices, accountability, transparency, especially under intense media pressure. And it shows how celebrity culture, the media glare, can sometimes mythologize a victim while obscuring the systemic issues. Poverty, lack of support, investigative failures that might have contributed to the tragedy or prevented justice.
So it's not just a cold case file, it's a mirror reflecting persistent societal challenges we're still dealing with.
Exactly. That's why it still feels so relevant.
Okay, let's dive into the murky waters now. Controversies, myths, maybe some lesser-known truths. This is where fact and fiction really get tangled. Let's bust some myths first.
Good idea, because some are really persistent.
Myth number 1. The killer was famous. A Hollywood insider, a director, a star, a studio mogul. Fits the noir narrative perfectly.
It does fit the narrative, but the reality is, well, frustratingly inconclusive. Yes, numerous high-profile names have been thrown around over the decades. Some had intriguing but ultimately circumstantial connections. Maybe they knew her, maybe they were in the vicinity.
But no smoking gun.
No legally conclusive evidence, nothing solid enough to stand up in court or even definitively satisfy investigators. Lots of leads just fizzled out or proved false. That Hollywood killer idea, compelling story, but remains pure speculation.
Okay. Myth number 2. The case was solved. Secretly, maybe, by some brilliant lone wolf investigator who figured it all out when the cops couldn't or wouldn't.
Ah, yes, the maverick detective trope, very popular in crime stories.
And Steve Hodel's work often gets cited here, right? Presenting his father, Dr. George Hodel, as the killer.
It does. And Steve Hodel, a former LAPD detective himself, has built a very detailed, compelling case. His books are incredibly influential. He argues his father was the Dahlia killer, maybe even others.
Got it.
But his conclusions rely heavily on circumstantial evidence, interpretations of photos, handwriting analysis that isn't universally accepted, alleged confessions caught on tape that are ambiguous. It's powerful stuff, but it hasn't led to official closure. Law enforcement hasn't accepted it as definitive proof. So, the privately solved idea, still a theory, albeit a very prominent one.
Let's dig into that George Hodel theory a bit more because it's so central to modern discussions.
Yeah.
What's the core evidence Steve Hodel presents?
Okay, so he points to several things. Striking similarities between surrealist art his father was involved with and the way Short's body was posed and mutilated. Photos allegedly found in his father's belongings after his death, one possibly showing Elizabeth Short. Also, the fact that the LAPD did bug his father's house in 1950 during a different investigation, and George Hodel was supposedly recorded saying things like, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now," and mentioning his knowledge of anatomy.
That sounds pretty damning.
It does sound damning. But critics argue it's circumstantial. Could the photos be misidentified? Was the recorded statement a boast, a hypothetical, or taken out of context? Confirmation bias is a potential issue when you're investigating your own father, and crucially, there's no direct forensic link, no DNA, no fingerprint connecting George Hodel indisputably to the crime scene or the victim. That's the hurdle official investigators likely can't overcome based on this evidence alone.
Right. It's compelling, but not conclusive in a legal sense. What about linking the Dahlia to other cases? Serial killer theories? like the Cleveland torso murders.
That comparison comes up a lot. The Cleveland murders were in the 1930s, also involved dismemberment, also unsolved. Some people see parallels in the presumed surgical skill, the targeting of marginalized victims.
Is there any real evidence linking them?
Not really. Linking cases across decades and hundreds of miles based on MO alone is really difficult and requires rigorous analysis. While it's tempting to see a single monster behind multiple horrific crimes, especially unsolved ones, these connections remain speculative. It's easy to find apparent patterns if you look hard enough, but proving they're real, not just coincidence, is another matter entirely.
Okay, beyond the big theories, what about less discussed aspects? Like the police and press relationship. You mentioned collusion earlier.
Yeah, some historians argue this was a significant factor. The fierce newspaper war meant journalists were desperate for scoops. And there are accounts suggesting police sources leaked information, maybe played favorites with reporters, possibly to steer the narrative or even hinder rivals.
So the media circus wasn't just reporting, it was potentially interfering or being manipulated.
That's the argument, that the quest for headlines might have overshadowed or even compromised parts of the investigation. It certainly shaped the public's perception in real time.
And another crucial, often overlooked point, evidence preservation back then.
Hugely important. Forensic science was in its infancy compared to today. Crime scene processing was basic. Protocols for collecting and preserving trace evidence, fingerprints, biological material, they just weren't what they are now.
So potential evidence was likely lost, or mishandled, degraded over time.
Almost certainly. Things that a modern CSI team would meticulously collect might have been missed entirely or contaminated, or simply not recognized as important. This is a massive roadblock for modern investigators trying to apply new techniques like DNA analysis. You need viable samples to test.
And they might just not exist for the Dahlia case.
That's the harsh reality. This raises that important question. How much is our understanding shaped or distorted simply by what wasn't collected or preserved back in 1947? It makes finding definitive answers incredibly hard.
A sobering thought about the limits of historical investigation. Okay, let's synthesize some of this.
Right.
What are the main perspectives from experts and investigators today? How do they frame this unresolved narrative?
Well, you have the mainstream law enforcement perspective. Officially, the LAPD position has generally been cautious. They acknowledge the thousands of leads and confessions, but stress most were false.
And they emphasize the lack of conclusive evidence against any single suspect.
Exactly. Their stance is dictated by the need for proof beyond a reasonable doubt, admissible in court. So, despite all the theories, from their perspective, the case remains officially unsolved due to that lack of definitive physical evidence.
Then you have the prominent alternative investigators, like Steve Hodel.
Right. Hodel represents that dedicated, often personally driven investigator who believes they've found the answer the officials missed. He uses crime signature analysis, photo interpretation, historical research, and pushes hard for renewed forensic testing.
His work has definitely kept the case alive in the public eye.
Massively influential, especially in true crime communities, but again, heavily debated by critics and not officially endorsed as the solution.
And culturally, figures like James Ellroy have shaped the narrative in a totally different way.
Through fiction, yes. Ellroy's The Black Dahlia novel took the known facts and wove them into this dark, complex tapestry of noir fiction. It became the defining narrative for many people.
So his fictional version arguably influences public memory as much as, or maybe more than, the actual case files.
It really does. It shows the power of storytelling to shape how we remember, how we understand historical events. His version captured the feel of that dark LA mythos.
And finally, what about forensic experts looking back? What are their key takeaways?
They consistently point to the anatomical knowledge suggested by the bisection and mutilations. The precision is noteworthy.
But they caution it doesn't automatically mean a doctor, right?
Correct. They note that some offenders learn these things, disturbingly. But the key forensic observations remain. The lack of blood at the scene, the apparent washing of the body. These point unequivocally to a secondary dump site and a killer who had the time, means, and composure to prepare the body elsewhere. That's solid forensic deduction based on the scene.
So we have the official caution, the passionate alternative theories, the cultural myth-making, and the stark forensic realities. It really is this complex, unfinished puzzle. Each perspective adds a piece, but the full picture remains elusive.
And frustratingly so.
Let's look at some specific examples now, almost like mini case studies, to see how these different approaches play out and shape our understanding. Steve Hodel's investigation is a prime example of that amateur or alternative advocacy.
It really is. He spent decades compiling evidence, circumstantial, yes, but the vast amounts of it. Family history, photos, documents, connecting dots, building this case against his father brick by brick.
It shows the dedication you sometimes see from retired professionals, doesn't it? Bringing their skills to bear on old cases.
Absolutely. But it also forces us to ask about objectivity. Can you truly be objective investigating your own parent in such a horrific crime? The potential for confirmation bias, seeing what you expect or want to see, is significant.
So it makes you, the listener, really think about how you evaluate evidence presented outside the official system. What are the standards of proof?
Exactly. It's a fascinating study in conviction and interpretation.
Then there's the impact of Elroy's novel, a case study in cultural reshaping.
Totally. His book, and the movie later, didn't just retell the story, they transformed it into this iconic symbol of post-war LA noir. Corruption, obsession, the dark side of the dream.
It cemented the Dahlia as that kind of story.
It did. It shows how powerfully fiction can frame history, creating myths that become almost more potent, more memorable than the documented facts. It shapes public memory profoundly. For many, Elroy's story is the Dahlia story.
And finally, that tendency to compare the Dahlia to other cases, like the Cleveland torso murders. What does that search for patterns tell us?
It highlights a fundamental aspect of investigation, both professional and amateur. The search for linkages, for seriality. If you can connect unsolved crimes, maybe you can identify a single perpetrator.
Looking for that elusive signature.
Right, but it also underscores the danger of seeing patterns where none exist. Similar MOs can be coincidental. Overgeneralizing based on superficial similarities can lead investigations down dead ends. You need concrete links, not just thematic ones.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, these examples show how the Dahlia legacy is built not just on facts, but on investigation, interpretation, fiction, and the ongoing search for answers, however flawed or speculative.
Precisely. It's a mosaic of approaches, each adding to the complexity.
Now, the Dahlia case started in LA. Feels very American, very Hollywood, but its echo spread further, didn't it? Let's talk about cultural variations. How is it seen elsewhere?
Well, within the United States, and especially in Los Angeles, it's baked into the cultural DNA. It's true crime folklore, it's noir legend, it's a ghost story haunting the city.
And used to critique Hollywood, the dream factory's dark side.
Definitely. Also used to examine that complex police-press relationship we talked about, and as a starting point for conversations about violence against women, particularly vulnerable women drawn to the city's promise. It carries a heavy symbolic load domestically.
But internationally, how is it viewed from outside the U.S.?
Often it functions as the emblematic American crime. A symbol of Hollywood's darkness, yes, but also often cited as an example of American media sensationalism at its most extreme.
So, less about the specific mystery, more about what it says about America.
Frequently, yes. Scholars and writers abroad use it in studies of media ethics, the power of the press, the global spread of true crime narratives. A local LA tragedy becomes this universal symbol of certain American tendencies or perceived tendencies.
Interesting. And do different cultural or religious lenses change the interpretation too?
They can. Some analyses might focus heavily on the victim-blaming scene in the 1940s reporting, contrasting it with perhaps different cultural norms around victimhood. Others might use it to critique modern true crime fandom itself, the ethics of consuming such violent stories, viewed through their own cultural values.
So it's not just a static puzzle, it's a story that gets refracted through different cultural prisms.
Exactly. Abroad, it's often less about solving the whodunit and more about using it as a cautionary tale, reflecting broader societal anxieties or values about media, violence, justice, how we treat victims.
It really shows how context shapes meaning, doesn't it? The same core facts resonate differently depending on who's telling the story and where.
Absolutely. The cultural frame is powerful.
Okay, let's step back into a critical analysis now. Studying this case, what are the strengths, the weaknesses, the benefits, the dangers? We need to be aware of these as we engage with it.
A crucial step.
So strengths. Why is it still valuable to study the Black Dahlia?
Well, it offers this incredible window into post-war American culture, the mood, the fears, the social dynamics. It's also a fantastic case study for tracking the evolution of media ethics, or lack thereof sometimes, and the development of forensic science.
It's like a microcosm of big themes: crime, celebrity, media, narrative.
Precisely. It provides really rich material for understanding how those things intersect, both historically and now. It continues to teach us about ourselves.
But the weaknesses and limitations are significant. significant, as we've
Oh,
discussed.
yeah. Huge. The sheer volume of speculation, sensationalism, fictionalization over 75 plus years has muddied the waters incredibly. Trying to separate fact from fiction now is a Herculean task for anyone.
Finding reliable primary sources amidst all the noise.
Exactly. And practically speaking, as we mentioned, the poor evidence preservation from the 1940s is a massive limitation. Without new evidence magically appearing, definitive forensic answers are just highly unlikely. The tools weren't there, and time hasn't been kind.
So given those limitations, what are the benefits of continued attention? Why keep talking about it?
Well, paradoxically, the continued attention keeps the pressure on for potential forensic breakthroughs. Even if Dahlia evidence is scarce, the drive to apply new tech might benefit other cold cases. It pushes science forward.
And it keeps important conversations going.
Yes, vital cultural conversations about how media treats victims, the ethics of sensationalism, how we process tragedy as a society. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions.
Which leads directly to the dangers. What are the potential harms associated with this enduring fascination?
Several serious ones. First, re-victimization. Constant retellings, especially sensational ones, risk reducing Elizabeth Short to just an icon, a symbol, a gruesome image. Her actual humanity gets lost.
She becomes the Black Dahlia, not Elizabeth Short.
Exactly. Then there's misinformation. Amateur online sleuths, compelling but unproven theories presented as fact. This stuff spreads easily and can distort public understanding, maybe even cause pain to any remaining family or connections.
And the potential glorification of violence.
That too. When creative treatments focus too much on the stylized gore, the shock value, it can risk normalizing or aestheticizing extreme violence, desensitizing audiences to the real horror and human cost.
These are really important points for critical thinking, aren't they? For you, listening, to consider the ethical weight of engaging with these stories. It's not just passive entertainment.
Not at all. There's a responsibility involved.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's circle back to that core question. Why does the Black Dahlia endure? What's the ultimate reason it still grips us?
I think it endures because it hits this perfect storm. It's an archetype, the beautiful victim, the dark city, the unsolved puzzle, but it's also rooted in real documented history in the archive. It's that blend of myth and reality.
A brutal mystery wrapped in Hollywood glamour and media frenzy.
Exactly. And because it's unsolved, it forces us to keep asking those uncomfortable questions about power, who gets to tell stories, how we consume tragedy, the ethics of it all. It holds up a mirror.
So future directions. Where could research or understanding go from here?
Well, the long shot is always forensic reassessment. If viable evidence exists and technology advances further, maybe there's a breakthrough someday. Slim chance, perhaps, but possible.
More likely, perhaps, is deeper media studies.
Yes, really digging into the archives of 1940s press practices. Understanding precisely how the media shaped the investigation back then could offer huge insights, not just about the Dahlia, but about media influence generally.
And emphasizing victim-centered histories.
Crucial. Actively working to recover Elizabeth Short as a person complex, flawed, real, not just the icon, that provides a more ethical way to remember her and maybe a better model for how we approach all true crime narratives. Focus on the human.
It feels like some cases stay unsolved, not just because of missing clues, but because, well, maybe the answers would make us too uncomfortable.
That's a provocative thought. Maybe they reveal things about our society's appetite for spectacle, about unequal power dynamics, about our tendency to turn real people into symbols to make tragedy more palatable.
The Black Dahlia, then. Less a cold case, more a persistent cultural mirror, reflecting how we struggle again and again to tell stories about violence and victims without doing more harm. So what does this all mean for you and how you choose to engage with these enduring, haunting stories?
A question worth pondering long after this dive ends.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the long shadow of the Black Dahlia. We hope this exploration has given you a richer, perhaps more critical perspective on a story that continues to fascinate and disturb.